messages. Nothing but junk mail and overdue bills to keep me company. Seems nobody wants to hire a real private dick anymore, a professional like me. A guy who does the detective work nobody else wants to do. A guy who wears hats and walks around in a black and white world. I began contemplating a more profitable line of work, like politics. We are the show you want to know. It's time to talk to Joe.
All right, folks, good afternoon and welcome to the Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN. You can join the conversation over the next hour at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. You can also text the show in real time at 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388. It appears on the screen here in the studio in real time. We try to work it into the conversation. Of course, WCRN does stream 24/7 on the TuneIn app. So if you don't have it on your device, seconds to download it. Do me a favor, hit the WCRN button there. We know you're there. We're easy to find. You can always tell Alexa to play WCRN. She'll do that. No questions asked. I do stream the show, audio and video, on my social media platforms at Joe Mangi Show, MANGI. So go to Facebook, go to X, formerly Twitter, Twitch TV, LinkedIn profile, and we are streaming live to the Rumble channel, the Joe Mangiacotti Show Rumble channel. So several ways to watch, and you can do that. We're also streaming to WCRN 830 AM Facebook page and YouTube channel there. My goodness, there's tons of ways of listening and watching to the show. Not to mention the fact that it is turned into a podcast and then distributed wherever you get your podcast, Spotify, Google Play, iHeartRadio, etc. Go subscribe and you can find it there. All right, 508-871-7000 today, back at HQ, flying the board behind the glass as I broadcast from the Cameo Studios. And again, you can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. We've got a lot to fit in today. We have a guest that will be joining us. So it's kind of a jam-packed day, right? Right now, Trump is in the Oval with the Irish or the Ireland's prime minister, taking questions and talking there about the great things that are going to happen. We got latest inflation numbers as well. Trump has taken action on men and women's sports, mainly in Maine right now. And again, joining us this hour, special guest Kim Hackler, who's been at the forefront of fighting for fairness in women's. Well, this is March, by the way, right? Women's History Month. So that's a big deal. And she's written a book. Her mother-in-law is Margaret Heckler, Peg Heckler, which many of you are going to remember as a congresswoman from the 10th District here in Massachusetts. Then she served as Secretary of Health and Human Services under Reagan and even the ambassador to Ireland at one point. So we do have new inflation numbers, right? 2.8% in February, lower than expected. Sounds good on paper, right? But don't get too excited just yet. Because of the Biden-era inflation spikes may have cooled, but looming tariffs, they're going to play a role here, again, short-term for long-term gain and stability. Consumer confidence still a little shaky, and big ticket spending like travel and entertainment is slowing down a little bit. People are holding on to their wallets right now, and we saw this with Delta Airlines reporting weaker demand. Of course, when you talk about the airlines, it could be the airline itself that people are just sick of traveling. If you notice, airlines, right, air travel is basically the only thing that has kind of gone down over the years. Everything else, right? Our phones have gotten smaller and smarter. Our TVs have gotten flatter and bigger and better. Computers are faster. Everything has kind of gotten better. But air travel, that used to be this huge thing, right? People would dress up and you had these air stewardesses and it was an enjoyable thing. It's gotten so bad. So when you see these numbers, maybe some of it has to do with just Delta Airlines sucking to travel on. I don't know, what say you on that? Yeah. So the question is, how much of this slowdown is actual progress? How much is just the calm before another storm? The Fed says it's too soon to, lower interest rates, and they're watching carefully. My take, Trump's policies in his second term could stabilize the economy just like they did in the first. but it's going to take, some time for it to trickle down to Main Street. Trump pulls federal funding for universities, right? So we're seeing this happen in one of our New England states, right? That's lighting up some headlines today. Trump yanked funding from the University of Maine system and Columbia University, too, because they refused to follow his executive order banning biological males from competing in women's sports, but not following the executive order. It's because of not following Title IX. And the executive order is just reinforcing an aspect of Title IX. And Biden tried to include transgender in the Title IX before he left office and was unsuccessful in doing that. And you might remember just a few weeks ago, Trump called out Maine's Democratic governor, Janet Mills, during a White House meeting, and he warned her, comply or lose federal funding. She didn't listen. She actually doubled down on that, folks. And on Monday, she found out he wasn't bluffing. Almost $30 million in federal funding has now been frozen. Of course, the ACLU is out there crying about academic freedom. But let's be real, this isn't about what a university teaches. It's about whether women have the right to fair and safe competition. The left used to champion Title IX protections for women in sports. Now they're completely abandoning the female athletes in favor of radical gender ideology. And guess what? 80% of Americans are against biological men competing in women's sports. The left is not only on the wrong side of science and common sense, they're on the wrong side of voters. And that, my friends, is how you do lose elections. It just is. Speaking of elections, let's not forget we are now in the Trump administration 2.0. The media keeps pretending like the economic turnaround isn't happening, but we saw what his policies did during his first term, did we not? Massive job growth, higher wages, energy independence, and booming stock market. The question is, how long will it take to undo the damage from 4 years of reckless spending, high inflation, bad trade deals? The markets are optimistic, but Wall Street knows the new tariffs could shake things up. We'll be watching closely to see if Trump's economic team can deliver another historic recovery. Between the economy, women's sports, and the backlash against leftist policies, something is happening. The country is shifting, and more Americans are waking up to reality. Look at how blue states are starting to push back on progressive policies. You've got independent and even moderate Democrats realizing that some of these ideas are completely detached from real life. We saw it on election night in 2024. Democrats lost because they overplayed their hand on cultural issues and the economy. And if they keep it up, 2026 could be another red wave, or I should say a red wave. All right, so coming up after the break, we'll be joined by Kim Heckler. In just a few minutes, we'll be bringing her in, who has been on the front lines of women, and now this is, again, Women in History Month. We'll talk about her new book about her mother-in-law and what she did, and really blazing a lot of things. Entering politics in 1966. And, of course, she held many positions for a woman in the 70s, 80s. Like I said, Congresswoman, 10th District in Massachusetts, Secretary of Health and Human Services, as well as Ambassador to Ireland. 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. Let's go to the phones. Mark has been waiting patiently. Hey, Mark, what say you?
I was watching the news this afternoon on the fake news media because I want to hear what BS they're pumping out to the public.
Fake news.
So, fake news. So, anyways, I'm watching, and they're Channel 7 out of Boston. They're running a story about how another Elon Musk Tesla franchise on Route 1, I believe in Dedham, was vandalized last night. Now, I would just want to make this quick statement. the perpetrators, the people who did this, these social justice warriors or whatever the hell they believe they are. You know what they are? They're not protesters. They're vandals, and they should be treated as such, as vandals. They're not protesters. They're vandals, and they should wind up at least at the maybe not state prison, but they ought to be doing a bit at the local county lockup. What say you?
Very good, Mark. Thank you for the call. And I agree 100%. And we've talked about this. We have the right to free speech. We have the right to gather and protest. Absolutely. Nobody's challenging that. But those actions, the violence, the vandalism, under the guise of protest or free speech should not fly. If you cross the line and you bring damage by throwing, and believe it, I mean, Molotov cocktails were used at some of the Tesla dealerships. And we saw this in the Summer of Love in 2020. We saw this violence. It's unacceptable across the board. So yes, you got to get these DAs and the police to bring the appropriate charges and the DAs to treat it as it is. And the problem that we have, or a problem I should say, is if there are no consequences to these bad actors and bad actions, it doesn't prevent. Part of enforcing the law, part of punishment, part of jail term, say, whether it's 60, 90 days in the county lockup, whatever it is designed as a deterrent. It's supposed to make people think twice before breaking the law. That's the whole idea here. And we're constantly seeing if they have the right ideological mentality or even their own mentality, because they believe that they're so right that the law shouldn't apply to them. But these DAs have to actually bring charges and show that there is consequences if you destroy people's property or business property, if you bring harm to somebody, if you threaten somebody, or you put them in danger. But folks, we're going to take our first break here on the Wednesday afternoon edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show at AM 830 WCRN. And Kim Heckler is going to join us on the other side of the break. We'll talk about her new book and her mother-in-law, Peg Heckler, as well. And don't forget, we're streaming on social media platforms at Joe Mangi Show, MANGI. Rumble page as well. 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000. Back in 2 and 10, folks.
Looking for guidance as you face a future on Social Security? It's hard to figure out on your own, but MedicareAdvisors.com is a completely independent insurance agency specializing in medical insurance planning. We work with the top insurance companies so we can offer our clients the best
Hi, Kim.
coverage for them.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Let's check the levels here.
I have a little microphone here, Joe, that I've plugged into my laptop. Does that sound good, or would you rather me unplug it and just talk into the computer?
No, the microphone's always much better than that.
Okay.
And that sounds good. Yep.
Okay, great. And this is mostly radio or also?
Yeah.
visual?
All the audio from this is being sent to AM 830 WCRN. It's going out on
Okay.
the 50,000 watt station. And this that we're on is being streamed to several platforms, and it will be aired on Twitch TV as well. So,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. I don't know if Kirsten told you, I actually got to meet your mother on a few occasions.
Yes.
Mother-in-law. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. She was my congresswoman when I was a kid. And then when she was secretary, I got selected to be one of the 2 kids sent to Washington for the youth conference on drinking and driving.
I saw that.
Yeah. And she put us up at the 4-H. in Chevy Chase, Maryland. And so I my parents voted for her, and that was the district we lived in.
Oh, what part of the district were you
Natick.
in? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, there were a lot of parades that she was in Natick.
Natick, 4th of July is a big parade. All right, we're going to be coming back, Kim.
Okay.
Hold on.
10 seconds.
I need audio.
Pendancegroup.com.
All right, folks, welcome back to the second segment of the Wednesday afternoon edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show here on AM 830 WCRN. And you can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. That will get you into the studio for two-way talking conversation. Now, I'm truly excited about our next guest here. She's an author, a storyteller, and someone who has a personal connection to a remarkable figure in American politics and public service. So joining us today is Kim Heckler, daughter-in-law of the late Margaret Peg Heckler, a trailblazer in every sense of the word. And for those of you who may not know or need a reminder, Peg Heckler was a congresswoman from Massachusetts for nearly 2 decades. Serving from 67 to 83, she was a strong independent voice, a champion of health care, women's rights, economic opportunity. And if that wasn't enough, President Ron Reagan tapped her to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, where she played a key role in advancing policies that shaped our nation's approach to health and social welfare. Later, she served as the U.S. ambassador to Ireland, strengthening ties between our countries, and we see that playing out in the Oval Office right now as the Prime Minister is with the President in the Oval. For me, Peg Heckler was more than just a name in the history books. I had the honor of knowing her personally. I was even her guest in Washington for the youth conference on drinking and driving during the Reagan administration, a pivotal experience, and just one example of her commitment to guiding young leaders and making a real difference. She has this incredible way of bringing people together, cutting through the noise and fighting for what she believed in. So today we get to hear Kim Heckler's perspective, both as family member and as an author who is taking on the responsibility of telling Peg's story. Kim, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and coming to talk to us.
Joe, thank you. It is a pleasure to be here.
So, pardon me, a little dry there. I just had to take a sip of water. But she's your mother-in-law. So, where was she in her career when you came into the family?
So she was ambassador to Ireland when I married her only son, John. And I got to go over and visit her when she was, at that point, the most powerful American in Ireland during the Curragh, which is the Irish horse race. And Anheuser-Busch was there. She was entertaining them, trying to encourage them to come and set up shop in Ireland.
Yeah. So yeah, a big part of that role as ambassador would be economic trade and getting that, doing that. Were the Clydesdales there, Kim? Did you get to see the Clydesdales?
I did.
Awesome.
I did. Yeah, it was a beautiful, and not only that, John Forsyth, Stephanie Powers, Augie Bush. I mean, all of the representatives that were there, Mick Jagger.
Stephanie Powers.
Yeah.
You mean Mrs. Hart?
Yes.
From Heart to Heart? Yeah.
I was trying to figure out why they were there, but I guess Anheuser-Busch brings their own set of celebrities, right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, they're still doing that, right?
Yes.
And as we know, they don't always make the best choice for spokesperson.
Yeah,
that's
true.
So tell me a little more about her in the family. I mean, we saw her in Massachusetts as a long time as a member of Congress, and that was when, of course, Massachusetts had more Congress people, right? Every time we seem to lose a seat every time we do the census, unfortunately, as we get smaller. But we had I think 11 seats at one point, and she was from the 10th district, and this is back in the 70s or late 60s or 70s. Yeah. So we know her as that. You came into the family then, and where'd you meet your husband, John, by the way, her son?
I met him at a polo party in Potomac, Maryland, and it was a pretty fancy event. Strawberries, white tent.
I got that from the word polo party. I kind of figured it was going to be pretty fancy.
Yes.
So that's good. Yeah.
I was overly impressed by Margaret, not only from the time I met her, but that she has been in my life for over 35 years. and lived no more than 2 miles from us in Arlington, Virginia. So I was able to have her over for Sunday night dinners. And then as she got up in age, I started sliding my phone and hitting record and thinking, I really need to be recording this, not just for the sake of our family, but for the sake of the world, because
Wow.
she was, yes, a congresswoman from the 10th district, and boy, did she love her constituents.
Yeah.
She was crossed the aisle easily, right? She was a moderate Republican back when Massachusetts had moderate Republicans. And she was, in fact, a celebrity in her own right. I've done over 130 interviews, and anyone I've asked has said, yes, I would be pleased to tell you my story about Margaret Heckler. But one that really comes to mind about the 10th district, Wellesley, all the way down to Fall River, is how when she would go into some of the predominantly Catholic households, that there along their hallway in a colonial would be the framed picture of the Pope, the framed picture of JFK, and their Congresswoman, Margaret Heckler.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you say that because I always make reference or joke about the fact being born in Boston, Irish and Italian, you're naturally a Catholic. And there were always 2 shrines in the house for my mother would have. One was Jesus Christ and one was JFK. And JFK's was bigger than Jesus's,
Oh
So
my
that's what it was.
gosh.
But when you talk about Republican Congress people from Massachusetts, people today think that's a mythical time. It's like that's when unicorns were walking the earth.
That's right. And it's interesting because in the late 60s, after she finished at Boston College Law School as the only woman in her class, and she graduated top 6th in her class, and the Boston law firms would not hire her. We will never hire a female attorney. And by the way, you're a mother. So when she went into Congress, it was amazing how she was accepted as a woman, but having to win and beat Joe Martin, who had served Massachusetts for 42 years, had come into
Wow.
Congress like 1923.
Wow.
And
That's
she
crazy.
came in feminine, attractive, 35-year-old, 5'2". He was eating his lobster up on the Cape, and she was hitting all the train stations, vote Peg Heckler, right?
Yeah.
The A&P supermarkets,
She
going
did
to
it old
church.
fashioned.
She did it the
Yeah.
old-fashioned way. She met the people, and even her assistants used to say, you really don't have time to talk to them. And by the way, they're a Democrat. And she said, I don't care. They're telling me about their son that's in the Vietnam. Let me finish.
Yeah.
So yes, she was.
See, I think politicians, or at least used to be, I think right now the party it's such a, there's no talking that the Ronald Reagan, Tip O'Neill understanding, right? That, yeah, we can be political adversaries up until 5 o'clock, but then we're going to go have a beer. And that was the Reagan O'Neill dynamics back then. I don't know if we have that then, but let's put a pin in the last few years and where politics have gone. But I've always thought that. I mean, I ran myself in Massachusetts for a state Senate seat, and you have to talk. Running as a Republican, you have to talk to everybody. And I think if you have a conversation, or it used to be, if you had a conversation, that would melt away the party ID, because if you got to know the person, it's like even today, my advice to these people who have this Trump derangement syndrome, or just MAGA, anti-MAGA, why don't you have a conversation, right? And don't use those low level buzzwords, racism and bigotry and this and that. Eliminate that from the vocabulary, and just ask them about their family or their work, or what it is. And I think that will melt a lot of things away. So let me ask you something, Kim. When you said you turned the phone on, when did you decide to write a book? When you decided to start recording these, conversations or her remembering things, was that already a calculation, or when did the calculus to write a book come into play?
I think probably when I was tasked to go through a couple of her storage bins, and they were floor to ceiling boxes, hundreds of them, not even counting the over 220 that are her papers that are located up at Boston College at the Burns Library. But these are the boxes that hadn't gotten up there yet. And as I was opening them up and seeing personal letters from Lyndon B. Johnson, Carter, Ford, Nixon, and Reagan, and realizing that this woman came alongside 5 American presidents and was the first and only Triple Crown woman in American politics, meaning that she served Congress, a presidential cabinet position, and an ambassador. And yet she's largely forgotten from collective memory, very different than a lot of the men.
Yeah.
And so
That's a
I
trifecta,
really,
boy.
yeah,
Yeah.
I felt empowered because her story is inspiring. And we're a country that's desperate for heroes. And Margaret Heckler, because of her disposition of her heart, because she was given away at birth by Irish immigrant parents in New York City, she had a lot to give back to the world.
That I did not know. So we're going to have to take a break in a minute. Can we delve into that about her childhood and upbringing? Because you just dropped something I had no idea. I know that, you know, in those times, I don't think a lot of people understand what it was like for a long time being poor, and especially coming to the New World as an Irish immigrant. I mean, remember John Kennedy had the old Boston Mass paper, in a copy of it in the Oval Office, where it had in bold letters in the bottom, INNA, Irish need not apply.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the you know, just the, I don't know what word I want to use, the bigotry towards Irish people right up into the mid 20th century, where the paper was so bolden to actually say, if you're Irish, don't even bother coming in. You're not going to get the job, because what they were looked down on. So it was a tough thing. And these are times where things were tough, and kids were often either sent away to schools or sent off to some kind of an apprenticeship, or sometimes abandoned. So yeah, we got to remember that as a historical point. We're going to take a break here, and you're going to stick with us to the break, Kim, right?
Yes.
Okay, so real quick, I know it's trailing on the Chiron below us here, but it is, of course, Women's History Month. In the book, A Woman of Firsts, Margaret Heckler, political trailblazer. Where can the book be found?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and probably all the other sources. It's been out there now for almost a month, and it's going gangbusters. Very well received.
Yeah, I'm suspecting you're doing a lot of these interviews, probably.
About 4 a day. Yes,
Awesome.
TV and radio. So,
All right.
yes.
All right, folks, we're going to take our first break, or actually the mid-show break here in the Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Our guest is Kim Heckler, author of a book about Margaret Heckler, former Congresswoman. Stick with us. Back in 2 and 10.
Time now for the forecast.
This gives us a chance to chat in the break. We're still streaming. Remember, we're still streaming live to Facebook, X, Rumble. You guys are getting to see a behind the scenes here while we play the commercials on the radio, Kim. So, yeah, let me talk. I have no idea. I'm sorry, Ted?
I said, just reminding your guest, it's a family show.
It is a family. I don't think we got to worry.
Yeah.
Hey!
Is this, so where are you home right now, Kim?
Me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm in Arlington, Virginia.
You're by the architecture behind you in the backdrop. I'm like, you look like you're in a Washington, D.C., Virginia home or something. Yeah. Okay. Was this Margaret's home, or was this you and John's home?
No, this is John and I's home.
Okay.
She had a gorgeous condo overlooking Washington. She saw all the monuments.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah.
I was just down there last week. I got to go down to DC fairly regular. I'm a senior fellow at one of the institutes down there.
Oh, wonderful. Oh,
Yeah.
we should connect. That's
Yeah.
great. And I love Kirsten. I mean, she's unbelievable.
Oh yeah, well, it's her father is on there too. That's why I go to their farm, the horse farm.
Oh,
Dr. Larry.
Wow. Okay.
And Dr. Larry and I used to do a show called Two Docs Talking. Yeah, but he's also participates in a TV show we got to do every week called The Weekly Report. That's Behind the Frontiers of Freedom. Yeah. So yeah, Kristen's been working with us on some of that stuff.
Okay.
All right, we're coming back in a second here.
Okay.
You need audio?
Try to unravel.
All right, folks, welcome back to the second half of the Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN, reminding you, you can join the conversation at 508-871-7000. That's 508-871-7000. Our text line is up and running at 617-297-8388, 617-297-8388. Text it like you would anyone else. It appears on the screen here in real time, and we try to work it into the conversation. Streaming on the Chiron, if you're watching the streaming, which you can do on my social media platforms at Joe Mangi Show, as well as the station's Facebook and YouTube page and Rumble TV. Our guest is Kim Heckler, who is the daughter-in-law of Margaret, or Peg Heckler, who was a congresswoman here from Massachusetts for almost 2 decades, right? What, 60s
Yes.
through the early 80s, wasn't it?
Yes, 16 years in Congress before she became Secretary of Health and Human Services and Ambassador to Ireland.
Yep. And even though, I got to meet her as a kid in the parades, because 4th of July Natick does a big 4th of July parade. But I got to actually meet and get to know her as a young man, a teenager, in the mid 80s when we went to DC. And, and at that point, I remember hearing Health and Human Services. And I could be honest with you, when you're like 16, 17 years old, you don't know what the hell that is. What's health? What is that? Of course, now today, you got Bobby Kennedy now. I mean, going in there. But can we go back to a little bit about her background? Because you made reference to that. When did she come to, was she born in America?
She was. Her
Okay.
parents were both Irish immigrants. They came through Ellis Island. They met each other in Queens, which was an Irish borough then, and had her in 1931. So the Great Depression was well underway, and her father was an alcoholic. He said that we're going to give the child away. So they gave her away 3 days into her birth to an old widow woman who had a home in Queens and would bring in Irish immigrants that needed a place to stay for here and there for a time. But Margaret would remain with this woman, Belinda West, until she was 18 and off to college.
So Heckler was the birth name. That was her parents. She didn't take the name of the woman who took her in.
Her name was Margaret Mary Catherine O'Shaughnessy. Heckler was her married name much later.
Yeah.
So she was Margaret O'Shaughnessy, and she never took the name of the woman because it was very fuzzy. The parents did not give her up for adoption. She was not a foster child.
Just go.
It was just like take her, right? Exactly. They did pay a pittance for her care. They would come once a month and pay this woman, Belinda West, who had no car. And it was hard in those days. That woman would bring the coal in and keep the house warm and have to go to the butcher and the baker and to get the food. But so Margaret had that wound of abandonment. She never quite understood how it could be possible that her parents gave her away. And she, of course, had many friends growing up that went home to their parents' house and dinner and that whole thing. So, but this woman did, in fact, encourage her, and she went to all Catholic girls' schools in New York City. So top of the top, and then on to all-girl Catholic college, all on scholarship. When she decided to go to law school, what she didn't know is that only 1% of women were lawyers at that time. But she had babysat for a family whose husband was a judge. She would go into that law library and open those books. And that's when it clicked for her. I will be a lawyer one day. And so she walked into Harvard right after they started admitting women. Here comes Margaret Heckler, and she applied as Margaret O'Shaughnessy, but then because of the discrimination of a dean, they didn't really want her because she was taking the place of a man. So she went to Boston College, a school then that was mostly there for Italian immigrants, Irish immigrants, And so graduated top of her class, only woman in her class, and only the second woman ever to graduate from BC Law. And she went into
Wow.
politics because no Boston law firms would hire her. It was, we will
So she'll
never
go
hire.
make the laws that they have to argue. Good for
Right.
her, right?
Right.
When you said that her going in, she didn't realize that only 1% of lawyers were female. And it just reminds me from that line from Star Wars, right? When
Yeah.
Han Solo says, "Never tell me the odds." Right? When they go, just don't, because then it's in your head. But like a lot of people, if they don't know that this is stacked against them, they don't know any better, and they just go right ahead and
Well,
do it.
and I would say that go right ahead is the theme of her life.
Yeah,
The theme of her life is go do it and don't let anything stop you. She never ever was dragged down by the fact that she was on her own for the most
right.
part. And when she ran against Joe Martin and beat him and came into Congress with, well, she was the only woman to come into Congress in 1966,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
70 men and Margaret Heckler. And one of them was George H.W. Bush, who would become president of their freshman class. And Margaret, the only woman, would be the vice president, which is funny. But there were only 11 women in Congress. And so, yeah, she helped write the laws that you talked about. Title IX, she was a co-sponsor. The Equal Rights Amendment, she was all over it.
Oh,
And
she was in Congress in the heyday of some major legislation, right?
I don't think
60s
people
to 70s.
understand. Yeah, it was called the second wave of feminism when Margaret was there, late 60s through the 80s. But the biggest thing that she did, landmark legislation for women, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, finally giving women the right to credit cards and home mortgages in their own name. That was a game changer. The
Sure.
world talks about women's right to vote back in the 20s, right? 1920s, they got the right to vote. Well, 50 years later, in comes Margaret Heckler. She's a lawyer, she's a congresswoman, and her husband's business is suffering. And she can't walk into a bank and get a loan herself. So she joins the Banking and Currency Committee in the Congress with 37 men and one woman, a widow,
Wow.
who said, women do not deserve credit in their own name. Can you believe it?
Yeah, see, today I don't, unless you know your history a little bit, you don't even think about that women could not vote actually at one point. Then when they
Right.
could vote, that even if, I always love to look at these, it's just a habit of mine to look at old marketing and advertising. And you see these commercials or advertising they were doing in the 60s and even in the 70s about computers, right? IBM existed. Like, it was, computers were the future. And they'd talk about, oh, someday you'll have this screen and you can shop online and pick out the woman, the wife has a very specific role, can
Right.
pick all this stuff out and buy anything online after it goes to the husband to approve it before they're able to order it, right? Under
Well,
the
that's it.
understanding they didn't have their own credit or bank account or anything of that nature.
No. And as a matter of fact, women had to put a lot of things on layaway. If they wanted that playpen, they put it on layaway. And
Mhm.
after months and months, they could take that playpen home. But that Margaret, because she lived with that widowed woman and saw the rights of that woman
Mhm. Well,
affected.
God bless this Belinda woman, right? Belinda West, you
Yes,
said?
Belinda West.
I mean, think about that. In the time that this woman was a single woman and she took in other children, other Irish
Not other
children.
children, but other
Immigrants, okay.
adults. If they came through and they couldn't afford to stay anywhere, she would open up her home if there was an empty room. But Margaret was the only child in the home.
Got
And
it.
she really didn't learn how to do any type of house cleaning because her parents did pay something for her care. So it's not like she did the dishes every night. So when she came out of college and law school, she was very cerebral in her thinking, right? I mean,
Mhm.
she was ready to make it happen and she had the brains to do it. And she wasn't afraid of the men because she had gone to law school with them and she could answer and get to the answers as easily as they could. So when she came into the Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate there as well, there were over 500 men and only 11 of them. And so she was extremely comfortable with them.
Folks, we're talking to Kim Heckler, who's the daughter-in-law of Margaret, or some may remember as Peg Heckler, former Congresswoman from Massachusetts, then Secretary of Health and Human Services, and Ambassador Ireland. Kim, how long did she serve an ambassadorship?
4 years. She served, yes, under Ronald Reagan.
Okay. And you met her as ambassador. And when did she become Heckler? When did she meet her husband, and how did that come to be?
So he was at Fairfield University. He ended up graduating out of the first class of Fairfield University. She was at Albertus Magnus which was an all-girl Catholic college in New Haven, Connecticut, just right there near Yale. And she joined the debate team. She already had politics in her blood. He also was on his school's debate team. And they were lectern to lectern, competing, debating. And she won multiple times. She beat him. And he had a pretty good record until he met Margaret O'Shaughnessy.
So he literally met his match.
He literally met his match. Yes.
And said, all right, I can do this for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Yes. And he actually said to his brother, she's so smart, I think I'll have to marry her.
That's a very sweet story. That's good. And when did Margaret pass? What year?
2018. So 7 years ago.
Okay. And were you already underway in the book at that point?
I was definitely more in the research, not as much in the writing. And then I started doing 130 interviews, people like Jim Baker, Ed Meese, Sandra Day O'Connor,
Wow.
Mayor Flynn, Ed Markey, you name it, Connie Morella, congresswomen, heads of state, a former president, George H.W. Bush. If I called, they took the call and I got the interview.
That's
Everybody
awesome.
was open.
We're going to have to break here and wrap up. Again, where can they get the book and the name of the book?
Yes, it's A Woman of Firsts, Margaret Heckler, Political Trailblazer, available in most of the bookstores, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble.
Kim, thank you so much for taking time out, and I look forward to reading it. We'll put it on the list and take a look at it, and it was just great to have you here. Thank you.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you, Joe.
All right, folks. All right, folks, we're going to take a third and final break here on the Wednesday afternoon edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. We'll be back in 2 and 10. Stick with us.
Looking for guidance as you face a future on Social Security? It's hard to figure out on your own. The MedicareAdvisors.com is a completely independent insurance agency specializing in Medicare insurance planning. We work with the top insurance companies so we can offer our clients the best coverage for them. We design plans with a focus on low costs, which we combine with personalized insurance advice aimed at helping our clients make better informed decisions. Russ Swallow is a certified senior advisor and a licensed insurance advisor. He's been helping clients with their health insurance needs since 1970. And after a failed attempt at retirement, he created the Medicare Advisors in 2014. Russ concluded that since Medicare is health insurance, he might as well put his almost 50 years of health insurance experience to good use, as 75,000 people reach age 65 in Massachusetts every year, and they can use some help. Call Russ today at 508-831-0805. Put his years of personal experience to work for you as you try to unravel the complexities of Social Security.
Hi, this is Bob Lobel. The rules governing how you can receive your Social Security pension benefits are very complex. They're so complex, in fact, that many make choices based on limited information that costs them hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost pension income. Making the choices that are best for you often requires information that most folks don't know how to access and isn't readily available from Social Security. If you or your spouse are considering filing for your Social Security pension benefits, the Visper Group, a Worcester-based Better Business Bureau A+ rated firm, offers a complimentary guide titled Informed Social Security Planning that can be an invaluable resource for you. To request your copy of the guide, go to the website informedSSplanning.com. That's informedSSplanning.com to get your copy of the guide, or call our office at 508-421-6700. 508-421-6700. That's 508-421-6700.
All right, folks, welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on the Wednesday afternoon edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. That's 508-871-7000. And this being Women's History Month, and it's a celebration of women's contributions to history, culture, and society. Now, it has been observed annually since the month of March back in 1987. So it's really fun to have Kim Heckler, Peg Heckler's daughter-in-law, join us about her new book. And like I said, I had the privilege and honor of being able to meet that woman and know that woman and work with her a little bit in D.C. as a very young age. So that was pretty cool. 508-871-7000 to join the conversation. Let's go to the phone lines. Ken is waiting patiently. Hey, Ken, what say you? Ken? All right, not hearing Ken. Let me know when we got Ken on the line, if he's still there. 508-871-7000. So I did want to talk a little bit about these. So Slotkin, right? This Elsa Slotkin, she did the rebuttal. And then she's been doing, getting out there, right, to be seen. And she went on The View. Okay, folks, here we go. Another Democrat talking down to American people. They haven't got it. They're not putting this together. This time, Senator Elisa Slotkin from Michigan, she went on The View. Now, if you're a freshman senator like this and you're been referred to as a rising star and you want to really do something in politics, why would you go on The View? Why would you do that, given their reputation and how their lack of knowledge, their massive ignorance on topics and people? Why would you do that? But she goes on The View and she basically told millions of Trump supporters, MAGA people, and Democrats for that matter, because Trump won with a lot of Democratic support. And more importantly, the independent middle of the road people. And she tells them that we're all just a bunch of angry teenagers who haven't fully formed our brains yet. Yeah, that's right. She thinks we're too immature to know what's good for us, and that the Democrats, the self-appointed adults in the room, need to guide us through our tantrums. This arrogance is off the charts, guys. Breaking that down, because it not only is it insulting, it's also a classic example of why the Democratic Party is completely out of touch with working class America. Slotkin's comments reinforce the elitist attitude that the Democratic Party has, where they believe that they are the intellectual and moral superiors who need to educate the rest of us. Instead of respecting voters, she belittles them, claiming they are going through a phase like a rebellious teenager would. Calling the American people, particularly Trump supporters, angry teenagers is demeaning. It's dismissive. It implies that we don't have legitimate concerns about the direction of our country. That would be a rising crime, border security, inflation, government overreach. Only their party is able to have those conversations. This is straight out of the Hillary Clinton basket of deplorables playbook, folks. Democrats love to attack the intelligence of the American voter when they don't get their way. If you don't vote for me as a Democrat, it's because you're not smart enough to understand the issues. You don't know what's going on. Just vote for us and we'll take care of everything. So who's really throwing the tantrum? We'll try this. Is Ken available? We'll go to the phones. 508-871-7000. Ken, you there?
Hi, Joe.
There you go. Well, what's going on, Ken?
You just had a great interview with Kim.
Yeah, what a nice lady.
What a story. it made me think that I was hearing my famous relative story in a different fashion. I happen to be related to Ann Hutchinson, whose statue is in front of the State House.
Yeah.
With her daughter.
Yeah.
And it takes women of courage, spunk, to make a story like that and to open doors for those who follow.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you hear how she was treated by Democrats and others of when she was starting her law career. And she just kept fighting through.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that, that version of the Republican Party in Massachusetts is just like a glimmering memory. It makes you wonder what would it take to produce somebody like her again to be a powerhouse within the party.
Yeah. You know what? I don't know if the elements exist for that to come together because things are so different today, right? In Peg Heckler's time, like all of the politicians of that time, including people like JFK, we didn't have social media, internet, and the things that, make people's lives so accessible now. And these were politicians that came up in a time where you couldn't find everything about their college years or even high school years. You see what I'm saying? So there's this other aspect of deciding to go into public life today that didn't exist in the 60s, 70s, or of course before that. And you have to start looking at the first generation of politicians who came of age in the internet era. And I think that has caused people to pause about going into public life and public service. But is it a chicken or the egg thing, Ken, right? Do people in the public service, elected officials, they look at Congress's approval rating is in the dumper, but is it in the dumper because of their actions? And do they not the good people run in because of the way people look at that? What came first? I say it has to be their actions, because when I was a kid, it seemed like my parents and everybody looked up to representatives and senators and the governor. Like we were very impressed with these people, right? As if we all got together and decided to put the best of us forward to represent us. Of course, as I grew up, I found out that's not how elections work.
Most of the politicians during the late 40s, 50s, into the 60s were a product, or they actually fought in World War II.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't even just fighting. It's just all that went into that great struggle and coming out victorious, getting through the Depression. That built the character. So it's a function, I think, of events that create the people of high stature.
Yeah. We look at people different, but I had no idea about her childhood. So that was a total surprise when she casually mentioned about being given away as a baby. I had to go back and revisit that because I'm like, excuse me, what was that about? But I mean, my parents would be about the same age as she would be today if they were alive. In other words, they were both my parents were born in the 30s. So, and my mother was first generation born in America. So her parents came over in their late teens, maybe 20, maybe my grandfather might have been 20 when they came over. So they were dealing with a lot. So the stories I heard about our families, or my mother's side of the family's trek to the United States and landing in Boston, there was some stuff she was talking about, ring truth there or similar, and what they were facing and what they were contending with, in those days, which would have put them, here in the late 40s and 50s, as young adults coming to America for the first time. But go ahead.
That's all an immigration story.
Mm-hmm.
The greatness of the nation is an immigration system that works way better than any other nations until more recently when it got ridiculous, particularly the previous 4 years. So if you had immigrants that have to go through the fire, meet standards in order to be accomplished, great people come from that stock.
Yeah.
And so my heritage goes all the way back to the 1630s, where literally, my our relative Ann Hutchinson's father was put in jail for his religion. And that's a big reason why the people came then, was religious freedom, and they fought for it.
Sure. Yeah. And the economic opportunity that didn't exist at the time anywhere else, right? And especially in the 20th century, obviously before that, but even in the 20th century, when you were born in most countries where you were born into whatever class you were in, right? Pretty much you were going to be raised and live a life in that class. And America was offering that, that opportunity to make something, the dream. Anybody could be president. Isn't that something you were told, like I was told from kindergarten on, right? Anybody can grow up to be president.
Sure.
So America always had that.
Fresh start.
Say again?
For the immigrants, it's a fresh start. And then they greatly so appreciate that fresh start. Then they indoctrinate their children and grandchildren for the aspirations that you described.
And the thing is, and we're coming against the clock, but the other thing I wanted to share there, because it's popping in my mind, is that generation of immigrants, and my parents and the one after it and so forth, the other key difference, I think, was most of those immigrants who came here with the intention of staying here for generations, assimilating into the culture here, because the first thing they did is they learned English and they wanted their children to learn English, and they became very patriotic. And I think a difference we see today is a lot of immigrants, mostly that turn out to be the illegals, who come here to work for a 5 or 10 year period, send money home, enough money to build a home or buy a farm or whatever they're going to do, and then they leave. And so that attitude of becoming an American, I think, has vanished, Ken.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, we're against the clock, Ken. Thank you for the call. Always appreciate it. Great call. All right, folks, this is going to wrap up the Wednesday edition of the Joe Mangiacotti Show on AM 830 WCRN. Thank you for joining me. Of course, you can always watch it when we stream it on my social media platforms. You can always go to Rumble TV or Torch TV and watch any of the past shows as well. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock right here on AM 830 WCRN. Don't forget, we've got Frankie Boyer coming up right after this show, and she always has great, fantastic information about your health. I certainly listen to it. All right, folks, Joe out.